Okay, I have it recording as well. I'm just adding the, okay, it won't let me add tags, it's still a lie. Remote work. And then we're going to add a description, and then I'm going to go live. Join us now. I can always change it later. Okay, and we are going, okay. Oh, I mean, this is the problem. See, I did it, and then I didn't go live soon enough, so I have to do it again. So this is
Oh,
great.
that's frustrating.
Yeah, so after all that, we won't be on time, which is annoying. Okay, well, maybe I'll just add it when it's on. Okay, so we're going again. More live on Facebook. This is good to know about. I'm glad we, like, Ina and I, somebody from the team at Aginext and I spent about half an hour testing it this morning because it wasn't in any way intuitive or anything, but that's a good opening comment anyway. Okay.
Are we live?
I will go live in 3, 2, 1 because otherwise it might record before. It's setting it up again. It may be recording this now. I'm not sure.
It says webinar is now streaming live on Facebook.
Oh, that's interesting because it doesn't tell me yet, which is a great way to open our conversation, isn't it? So we are going to introduce ourselves in a minute, but if you're joining now, you'll see we're 2 minutes late because the one of the issues with remote working is it is fraught with technical difficulties, and certainly trying to figure out how everything works and then it breaking, especially with integrations between Zoom and Facebook Live, are not always great. So we'll be talking today about how to overcome that. So I'm Jennifer, I'm part of the Aginext team, and this is our second in our experimental Facebook Live conversations with our speakers for Aginext 2019 this March. And of course, this is an experiment unto itself because we're using remote Zoom to Facebook Live, but it's a good way to introduce remote teams and some of the struggles and joys from it. So Judy, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Judy Rees. I'm in West London. I'm in my garden office in West London, and Zoom, the main tool we're using for this, is what I use all the time, and I'm very new to Facebook Live. So this is an interesting experience for me on a number of levels. Some of your listeners will know me because of my involvement with clean language, which is a precision inquiry technique. But through my interest in that, and because I was teaching this precision inquiry technique remotely, I found myself becoming a bit of an expert in remote working, remote training, and remote team development. And I'm doing some very interesting work in that area, and remote meetings in particular. So I'm going to be speaking about how to make remote meetings not suck at Aginext.
How to make remote meetings not suck is a very good title because they can suck. Let's be honest, they actually can.
They absolutely can. So I'm curious, have we actually got anybody watching us on Facebook Live? Can we tell? Can we get them to press the button to say like and get little hearts going all over the Facebook Live?
We do have a like there. Someone gave a thumbs up.
Awesome. That's really reassuring.
I'm hoping that also comments will then appear on the side of the screen because ironically, because we're recording this, it's very poor setup actually. So I wouldn't recommend for your team to maybe do this, but a lot of people do it to Facebook Workplace so that they can do webinars with their whole team that way. But yeah, so I can't actually see our screen is like constantly loading, but I think I have to have it processing to see the comments. So we will see, but if anyone wishes to leave a comment, please do. So let's just get started, and hopefully people will ask questions if they want to, but we're always prepared with other questions. And yes, this is the true reality of working remotely, is it not, Judy?
It is
Start.
when you're, yeah, up to a point. When teams work remotely well, the technology fades into the background because they've got decent technology, and that's a given. So for me, this notion of a broadcast is not the way people should be working remotely at all. Zoom, which is an awesome tool for a group of, in fact, up to 200 people can have full live video at the same time. So it's maybe a bit too small for Facebook Live, but you know, we could have thousands, I don't know. But you can have up to 200 people on a Zoom call at any one time. And once you're used to it, the technology fades into the background. Once you know everybody's got a decent internet connection, everybody's got Zoom installed on their device, everybody's got a headset, absolutely critical. Everybody's got a headset.
Oh.
And everybody's got their video cameras turned on and enough light on their face so you can see them. That should be the bare minimum that any organization should expect when it starts with remote working. But unfortunately, that's not how it's been.
Yeah. So
organizations should provide that. Should
be
absolutely routine. And when it's provided, other things start to fall into place. But what is interesting, or interesting to me, is how you can then take your conversations to the next level when you're remote. I'll pause and let you ask a question, because I could go on about this at great length, because it's a topic that absolutely fascinates me. So
no worries. And I think it does make sense that if you have a team that you want to work remote, you need to make sure they have the tools. Maybe don't expect them to have all the tools. I think even if you have a distributed team, even if people are working part-time, they definitely have a laptop with a webcam, but they may not have a microphone, or like me, I've had many headphones and they never work. So I've definitely tried to do the headphone thing before, but I think that is a good list of different companies need to think about that. And that's okay. Mozilla, I always look to as a great example, because your choice is you can work remotely or you can work on site. And from there, there's flexibility. They pay for your office, whether it's on site, and there's dozens of offices around the world, or they'll pay for a home office, and you're still welcome to come in on site a couple days a week. They just expect if they're paying for a desk in the office, you'll be there maybe at least 3 days a week, but there's complete flexible work, and they give you an entire home office if that's what you choose.
And what's great about that is that different people work in different ways. Different kinds of work require a different environment. We sort of know that, but then organizations act as if they don't know that. So there's some fascinating research that came out, I think it was last summer, which said that when offices went from being, you know, the closed office type to being complete open office, the amount of interactions between members of staff catastrophically declined. So
crazy.
Where human beings, when it was closed offices, they would talk to each other for about 5.8 hours a day. As soon as they went open office, that dropped to 1.7 hours a day. And people switched to email instead.
So did it increase productivity?
So email, no, it catastrophically reduced productivity.
Okay.
So you know, people think that open offices are all about increasing the amount of interaction between people. That's not actually how it works. So by extension, this wasn't in the research, but by extension, we can think about what happens if people work from home and are given the means to connect with each other. A headset, a webcam, decent lighting, a decent internet connection. We can assume that people can choose whether to engage and when to engage depending on the kind of work they're doing.
And also we're not necessarily talking about everyone working from home. That doesn't work for everybody, but we need the flexibility to work from home. Maybe you have a sick child, you have a sick parent. they somehow do a hard Brexit and we're all SOL when planes are grounded and we have to figure out what's going to happen next and there's riots on the streets. You still want to be able to work, and you want to enable people to be able to work when they have time to work. Even if it's, you have a neighbor of mine is a working mom and she works for Bloomberg. So definitely an intense thing, but we're here in London and then the company's in New York. So she plans her day around being able to still pick up her child from daycare, and then she'll work a couple hours in the night making all her meetings with the US. No one knows the difference. It's fine as long as she has the technology and tools to do it properly and permission to do it properly.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just about to start a piece of work with IC Agile, the Agile Accreditation Organization, and one of the I've forgotten what her title is, but one of the main people there, Shannon Ewan. It's a fully distributed organization. They've got people in America and people in New Zealand and people and so on and so forth. Shannon, I think, lives in Chicago, wherever it is, somewhere in the middle of America. They had a huge snowfall. They're used to snow, but then the temperature dropped to something ridiculous, -40, I think she said it was, but that's in Fahrenheit, of course, because she's American. So they've got this snow, they've got ice cover everywhere. Nobody can move. The only difference for Shannon is that she can still work from home, but unusually she can't let her dog out.
Oh.
So there's a certain amount of barking in the background, but otherwise completely undisturbed despite this weather catastrophe.
The polar vortex, I think it's called, yes. So
now, Shannon, so Shannon and her team, of course, because they've been doing it a long time working remotely, have got good at doing what they do remotely. And what they understand, because they're quite a mature organization, is that a good remote meeting starts from having a good meeting. Okay. So a good meeting design and a good meeting structure. If you take bad meetings and bad interactions remote, they will still be bad.
Okay.
They won't suddenly improve because they're remote.
So a bad team will always be bad, and having to deal with the distance might just make it worse.
A bad team has significant scope for improvement. I certainly wouldn't say that a bad team will always be bad, but a bad team that goes online will not magically get better as a result of going online or going remote. Mm-hmm. A team which has got significant challenges will still have significant challenges. One of the things I love to do with distributed teams is team development without bringing everybody together in the same place.
Okay. How does that work? How can you bridge that gap? Yeah.
Well, a lot of people will say you can't do team development if you can't get them all together so they can have a drink together or run through muddy fields or whatever your preferred team development methodology is. But I think that's mistaken, because if your team is distributed, if everybody's remote from each other, then they need to learn to work well in that format. It's not enough for them to learn to work well when they're in person together. They need to crack all of it in a single bound. So what I do is I get them on a Zoom call together. So it might be a team of 12 people, and we'll do a series of Zoom calls together where I take them through team development activities that have been specifically designed to work in this format. It's quite remarkable how much you can do in this format. People imagine that it's very restrictive, but it's not. You can still do physical games. The only thing I can't do is throw something to another person.
You can high five, though. We've learned that from...
I can certainly high five.
You can fist pound and high five.
Yeah, you can do all of that. You can hold up your notes and draw something. You can do all sorts of interesting things just within this little box. And especially when you use breakout groups, which Zoom has wonderful breakout group functionality, get people into pairs and threes, get them doing the small conversations, get them having the informal virtual coffee kind of conversations. And you can do an enormous amount when you're remote.
I think it's
Sorry,
important
I'm on topic again.
No, it's great. We don't work for Zoom. We've just both been on remote teams for a long time. So Zoom.us is a good tool. There are other tools, but I think for us, at least for me, I like Zoom because it has a Brady Bunch style feature where everyone's voice is equal. Everyone's equal on the screen. As if you're using something like Hangout, the person talking dominates the screen, which then dominates the conversation. So, and like we said, the breakout groups, screen sharing, things like that, that are really good in Zoom, particularly. Also, for me, I really like that it tells you has the poor internet, so you don't have to question who needs to restart. It's quite clear that person has the bad connection, which is quite interesting too. I think something that it all comes down to is that remote work is still just starting to catch to be popular, and flexible working in general, because there's a lack of trust in employees, and this involves an implicit trust, and you have to teach. You're not seeing people working anymore, which honestly, when they're on their computers, even if it's an open floor plan, you don't see it anyway. But how do you change the form of communication? How do you teach people to work out loud when they should work out loud anyway? When you're face to face, you're not really seeing what's going on their computer. That would be quite rude, but we somehow have a more implicit trust by default when we're face to face that they're doing what they're doing than online. So how do you work out loud communication and things like that? How do you improve remote?
Isn't it interesting that loads of organizations now have flexible working, loads of teams are distributed. Nobody is teaching, well, Lizette, of course, and myself, but very few people are teaching the skills of remote working, and very few companies are training those skills. Yeah. I think that's quite surprising, because it's actually quite significantly harder to work with a hybrid team where some people are in the room and some people are remote than when everybody's remote, everybody's distributed.
How do you bridge
particularly
that
when it comes to meetings. Yeah, so particularly when you've got meetings, it's harder when it's just one person. And people don't realize that. They think, oh, I've got to do that because that person's got to pick up their child or whatever it is, so can't come to the meeting. We'll just have to busk it. Stop busking it. Start giving some attention to how to make this thing work. So when it comes to how do you measure someone's work, well, if you're working in a good, confident, agile way, you're already having the conversations that let you know what's happening. You're having a daily stand-up. Mm-hmm. You're having your planning meeting. You're having your review. The basis of Agile is building this kind of trust within a team and within teams of teams. And there's actually no reason that that should be reduced at all in a remote context, as long as you put the meetings in place and the conversations in place to make it happen. What you often see, though, again, perhaps because people just don't know any different, is that they stop having stand-up meetings, for example, and say, oh, we'll just type in a status update. A status update is not the same as a stand-up meeting. Status meeting is not a genuine check-in with your colleagues. It's a broadcast. There's no feedback loop there. One of my pet subjects at the moment is a stand-up meeting should be done standing up.
Even if you're on a remote team, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah,
like that. We can do our stand-up meeting standing up.
It doesn't mean you have to have a stand-up desk either. I'm sure you have a bar or countertop you could use, as I've done on many rooms.
Yeah, exactly. In this particular instance, I've got a gadget desk and I can just press the buttons. But the reality is that, you know, previous to this, I had an IKEA lack table, you know, the ones that cost £5?
Yeah.
Popped on top of my desk.
That sounds highly unsafe, but a good idea.
It works perfectly well.
That's totally true. Yeah. Okay, so you're saying, and I think something we just need to reiterate is the importance of video. And I do see it on, I have other distributed teams that I've joined and I'm on, and we don't use video. We use Zoom, so why don't we use video anyway? What is the point? But I think video is a great way to explicitly know how people are doing. You can, it gets to know people face to face, of course, but you get to see eye rolls, or as we keep mentioning Lisette, because both of us have worked with Lisette Sutherland of Operation Superpowers, and she has her super cards, which say things like, okay, let's move on, or we can't hear you, you're frozen. Things like that.
I think video makes an enormous difference. You know, it's chalk and cheese. I've been around long enough to have worked in large organizations before we even had conference calls. Then when the spider phone came in, we thought it was amazing, and we could finally talk to our colleagues. But nowadays, video is the minimum. And this nonsense about I'm not going to turn on my camera is just not okay. The way I persuade people to turn on their camera, I do this and carry on the meeting and see how long they think it's okay for me to keep going.
Oh, wow. That's awkward, but powerful.
It is powerful. And you would not do this in a face-to-face meeting. So why do people think it's okay to do it on a video call?
It's very fair. It's very fair. How else do you run remote meetings more effectively? Especially what happens if you suddenly have, this is even better. How do you deal when you have co-located people in the same location, and then you suddenly have someone that needs to, because of grounded planes of Brexit, or because they are caring for a family member, or they're unwell? Because I really don't want people coming to work sick. We shouldn't promote that. We should always promote, okay, if you still have work to do, stay home when you're sick.
So the trick for me is in the preparation. If the situation comes along and you've never given it any thought before, you're probably not going to run your most brilliant meeting in that situation. The trick for me is in the prep. So when you're planning your meeting, think about it. How are we going to structure this so that everyone can participate, including the remote people?
Okay.
Now, depending on what kind of meeting and what kind of structure you already had planned, that will be different. So, for example, if you were doing an activity that involved a lot of sticking post-it notes on walls, what might you do there? Well, one alternative is to, instead of do physical post-it notes, move all of that to an online tool. So that mural or real-time board. Now, you do lose something. You lose the physicality of standing together at a wall and, sticking the post-it notes together, but you gain the active participation of the remote person. Another way to do it would be to have somebody in the co-located space act as a proxy for the remote person if there's just one, or a buddy. So that two alternatives. One is somebody who's maybe not a member of the team or an extra person in the meeting comes there just to stand in for the remote person, and they're connected with the remote person with a headset.
Wow, okay.
And potentially a camera.
The person isn't speaking broadly to everyone, or?
They're just talking to you, and you've got the camera on.
Oh, wow.
On the board, and you move the post-its and speak as if you were them. So that would be one way to do it. Wow. Another less sophisticated way is to use a buddy in the room. So one person in the room, it's their job to make sure that the remote person is involved, make sure that the remote person is always asked what do they think in any discussion. The more technically sophisticated way is to get one of those telepresence robots.
Of course, yeah.
Which, if you haven't seen them, look them up. They're amazing pieces of kit.
They're usually
you
made with
can,
just an iPad or tablet, and it's
yeah,
the
yeah.
person's head, and they can at least, turn to look around or nod their heads, or it goes all the way up in price to things they can drive around the office. There are whole offices that have these telepresent robots all the time. Something I had learned from Lisette is when we had a co-located meeting together for the first time as a remote team, there were 2 or 3 team members for various reasons that couldn't join. So they were on the TV. It didn't work great, but they always got to speak first because they were the most likely to be ignored or forgotten.
Yeah. I remember an activity we did for Mark Kilby. He was doing a thing at a conference in Florida, an Agile conference in Florida. And he decided that he would get the room sitting at tables, and for each table, there was a remote expert somewhere else in the world. And I was one of those remote experts, as was Lisette, and there were a few of us, so 1 per table. And each table was given a way of, by video, talking to their expert.
Okay. And this was during his talk, or like, did you workshop? So you were basically facilitating?
It was a workshop. So he was facilitating the whole room. Each table had an expert remote. Not one of those experts ever managed to interact with a person at the table, simply because people at the table spent all their time talking to each other.
Oh.
They never even turned to us to say hello.
I find that quite rude, but maybe
it was rude.
That you are real people, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the only person who managed to interact with her table was in one of those tablets on a little stand, and she was able to waggle herself. And she waggled and she waggled and she waggled and she waggled herself. And eventually somebody said, "Oh, hello."
That's crazy, because you guys were the experts and they weren't taking advantage of it. So part of it is about training people to not forget the other teammate when the teammate is suddenly remote, or because the whole point is that you get to hire people, the best people anywhere in the world. If you're embracing flexible work, they could be remote always, and different time zones, which is another thing. You have to start talking in time zones if you have a remote team.
Yeah, but another thing I learned from Mark Kilby is to do your best to minimize the time zone differences if you possibly can when you're hiring. Because otherwise, how can you have that cadence of daily meetings and those kind of things? If you just hire someone for example, the UK to Australia, you are always going to have huge challenges to connect. Whereas if you bear time zone in mind, then that's just one of the considerations that comes up. I think people need to be trained to remember the remote person, but more importantly, whoever's organizing the meeting needs to design the meeting in such a way that it's automatic to remember the remote person.
And don't forget, we're just talking about extenuating circumstances, but there are people that have physical or neurodiverse reasons that they need to work remotely sometimes. And usually people are more productive working from home, not less, as people distrust and believe.
And there can be some awesome stuff done remotely. So I know that there are people doing mob programming, pair programming writ large, mob programming remotely.
Oh, wow.
And they're sharing a screen, writing code together all day, every day.
And that makes for better
each
code.
From somewhere completely different.
Yeah. Just some might be in their pajamas, and that's okay. Work appropriate.
That's another reason to put the video camera on, is it forces people to actually put clothes on every morning, which is good for people's mental health.
That is actually true, because otherwise you'd live in a robe all the time. Absolutely. My first couple weeks back from maternity leave, I just try to keep the camera neck high, or while trying to breastfeed on calls if needed, or change nappies. But you got to do what you got to do. I was still hitting the ground running working, so you got to do what you got to do. You just have to be a little safe for work. Thank you.
It's funny, the nappy change is a lovely example of, did anyone else get the full sensory experience of that story?
Isn't it better that I was working from home and you didn't need to smell that?
because we've got, it's my bit is less the technology and more the psychology of this. We are amazing creatures. Our imaginations don't just do pictures. They do smells. If you give people enough scope to time to think and frame your meetings and design your meetings in ways that allow people to use their imaginations and to engage with what's going on, they will produce amazing work. If people just are used to, there's a book by Elise Keith. Elise Keith is, I think she's the CEO of Lucid Meetings, but she's certainly the person behind Lucid Meetings. She's written this awesome book about meetings. And it's not so much about remote meetings, but it is about meetings in general. And I think everything she says could be applied to remote meetings. The core piece that she starts the book with, she calls it the doom loop. She says, if you think that this meeting is going to be awful, you will behave as if this meeting is going to be awful.
Sure, yeah.
When you behave as if this meeting is awful or going to be awful, then other people will think the meeting is going to be awful. Mm-hmm. And then they'll behave as if the meeting is going to be awful. And then what does that do to your beliefs? And you're basically going round and round this spiral of doom where everybody thinks it's all going to be difficult and bad. And nobody's pulling it the other way. Whereas
the negativity loop, yeah.
Fact is that doing high quality remote work probably starts with you believing that it's possible. Once you believe it's possible, then you'll behave as if it's possible. You'll spend a few minutes inquiring as to how has somebody else done this? And once you give out that message that this is possible, doable, and all of that, then other people will start to chime in, start to build the thing. And as Agilists, we should be capable of adapting and improving. How did this retro go? How can we improve it next time? And it's a lot of this is really interesting and possible. So one of the things I do is train trainers to train Agile-ish topics remotely. And again, the first piece is always to convince them that it's even worth bothering to try. I did some interviews last summer about why do really good trainers and facilitators believe that remote work is impossible for them? And they would come up with things like, well, I can't sense the energy of the group.
You should if you know the people and you want to talk to them, yeah.
Once you've got video cameras on, headsets, decent light, well, you may not be able. So one of the people I was interviewing said, well, how I sense the energy is I smell it. Now, you can't literally smell your colleagues remotely yet, but you can find other ways to detect the energy in the group. You can watch what they're doing. You can watch their body language. You can use, for example, chat and question systems and things so that people are interacting on multiple levels. So you can learn to sense the energy in the group. The first step, though, is believing that it's worth trying.
Interesting in yourself and interesting in your team or your group of people that you can do it. Thank you so much, Judy. This was great. And I know we all can't wait for your talk specifically on how to keep meetings from sucking, and especially remote meetings. But it sounds like it's definitely applicable to those having in-person meetings too. So thank you so much. And I'll see you in March at Aginext.
Thank you very much.
Bye.